Hello, welcome to Practicing Life podcast. I'm your host, Ashely Pitzer. Today's topic is over communication. And what really brought this on was a conversation that I seem to keep happening with my husband over those lovely words that you've probably said yourself. I didn't say that. Now, if you're like me, this is something that happens in a conversation, and it happens for a lot of reasons. A person will say, I didn't say that, to refer back to an idea or something that was expressed by the other person, the person speaking. You can use the statement, I didn't say that, for a lot of reasons. It can be to clarify or to correct the other person. It can be to defend yourself and what you know to be saying true, as in like a way of saying, you're putting words in my mouth. It can be to disagree with the statement previously made. But what often happens in a conversation is two things. One, it's the person receiving the communication is hearing an implied meaning or criticism. Now, this is why communication gets so darn tricky. So darn tricky, right? So oftentimes when someone says, I didn't say that, it is because they have applied some type of meaning that everybody are meaning making machines. And I'm going to take a moment here just to kind of pause on our thought and kind of have a little teaching lesson. Because everybody, even though we all live on Earth, that's, I would say, people would universally agree that we live on Earth. And we all have our own unique perceptions, though, of life itself. And so this goes a lot to what I do as a hypnotist as well as a coach, right? I am helping people to understand that the way that they view their reality is very unique and individual to them, despite the fact that we are all on this common place called Earth. And so what that really means is that each person has their own model reality or their own manual or their own way of seeing the world. And because our brain does, certain functions, we filter things through our brain, through our perceptions, through our beliefs, through what we value, through our past experiences, through our past pains. And so every single thing that you are exposed to runs through these filters. And then those filters produce some type of result or outcome in your brain as to what they mean. And so when two people can have a conversation, you could see how easy it is to kind of miss each other in the conversation, to have miscommunication, because each person is speaking through their own lens of reality, their own perspectives, their own belief systems. And so getting back onto the topic of I didn't say that. Communication can get very blurry. If someone is interpreting something another person has said and they're hearing something that was implied, it may or may not be true. Right. And this is what goes to the front of the conversation of why I was talking about people will use the statement, I didn't say that, to defend, to clarify, to correct, to disagree. So these statements are important, but how you react is more important. And so if someone has an implied meaning or criticism, this does happen. I'm not going into the gaslighting kind of conversation here. People do this. It happens quite frequently, but it also can happen innocently in the sense that how you view the world and how you view things may be different than another person. And so the intention behind it is what really, really matters. But speaking to the more manipulative situation where someone is making an implied criticism or an implied meaning, they are doing that as a passive aggressive way of communicating something without directly having to take responsibility for saying something aggressive. So it allows a speaker to avoid directly saying something insulting or to say something without saying something. So it 100% occurs. And I really want to bring this up because when I'm working with somebody on communication, and it's tricky, I want to teach people what communication really is. And I'm not, I'm not saying that there's not more than one way of looking at something. Communication can mean different things to different people because we all have our own model of reality. But what I want people to do is when they are communicating with someone, especially if it's their partner, significant other, and you're having these type of situations where you're hearing that statement, I didn't say that, that's a good time to pause. And for the person speaking, for the speaker who said something to another person where they received a message from the person they were speaking to of I didn't say that, for that speaker, the original speaker, speaker A, that's a good point to say, okay, I am then miscommunicating. Because what communication really is making sure like communication actually doesn't occur until the person you are speaking to responds and lets you know how they are perceiving your message. Because if they didn't perceive your message the way that you intended, that's miscommunication. So we understand what it is in reverse, but in the forward direction, if you say something and you get a response of I didn't say that, then it comes back on you as the speaker. What do you really mean to say? Can you say it a different way? Can you clarify it and say maybe a metaphor around it or applied, not an applied meaning, but a different way of saying the same thing, right? So that this may strike the person differently because their model of reality, their perception, whatever's going on in their brain is impacting their ability to receive what you are really saying. And most people think when you have a communication, like when you're having a conversation with someone, that each person is responsible 50-50. So you say something, I hear something. We are 50% responsible. You're 50% for saying it. I'm 50% responsible for hearing it. But what I'd really like for you to consider is that whoever is speaking has 100% of the responsibility to communicate. Meaning that if the person interpretates it differently than what you said, then it is on you. The ownership and responsibility is on you to communicate it differently. And then we flip to the other person, the person receiving the message, right? Then it's also on you to stop and to really think about what's going on. And this is really eye-opening, if you will, because we are meaning making machines and we have these like goggles on, these visions, these blinders of everything that we've ever experienced. And so we put everything into this little box and we make it mean what we've always known it to mean. And so if you are on like the spiritual path, if you're waking up to, you know, the world itself and seeing things differently, then maybe you are more practiced than another person. But when you receive a message and you're thinking to yourself, I didn't say that, this is where you get to pause. All right, because you're making something mean something. And then it's, you can also come back to that person and say, well, when you say this, this is what I'm hearing, this is what I'm interpreting, this is the stories that I am making, right? You can also say, I didn't say that, but that generally is a buffer in the conversation, as in it creates like conflict, it creates turmoil, it creates anxiety, because there's a lot of defensiveness associated with I didn't say that. Not that there's anything wrong with saying that, but just know what you're getting yourself into. How you react is kind of your responsibility. So if you're hearing something and you're interpreting it in a certain way, what makes that true? Is there other interpretations that you can make out of that statement? So I know that my husband and I have this circular thing where I'll say something and he'll say, "Well, I didn't say that." And so for the longest time, I used to say, "Well, I didn't say that you did." And so even in my own life and in my own relationships, I'm growing too, because now I pause and I realize, okay, well, he's interpreted it to apply it as what I'm saying to mean him personally directly. He is, and this is also very natural. So if you don't know this about how your brain works, let me explain that your brain makes most things about you, like almost as a egotistical, self-centered, blah, blah, blah. Because, and this isn't negative, this isn't a judgment at all. This is just literally how your brain works. Because you see the world as one thing or one way, because you have your perceptions of the world, like you are, if you think about this in a movie, in your model of reality, how you are seeing the world, you are the star character, right? So if you were watching a movie and you had a star character, everything is revolving around that character. Everything is somehow relating back, even if it's indirectly, even if it's minute, something is relating back to that main character. And this is how we kind of process the world. So even if something has nothing to do with you, even if it's not related to you, your brain is naturally going to make it be somehow about you. Now you can train yourself out of this, and if you were raised differently than the majority of the masses out there, maybe this isn't an issue for you. But for most people, the way that their brain just naturally works is that they are the leading role in their movie of their own life, and therefore whatever anybody says to them somehow applies to them, right? And that's a general statement, because if somebody was like talking to you about how water is filtered, you may or may not apply that to you. People that are more introspective may be like, oh, they're talking to me about water, and they may come back into their brain and say, okay, do I do X, Y, and Z with water? Am I contributing to the health of the planet with water? Am I polluting the water? They may start making it be about them in some way, or they could just take it as like, this person is interesting, their thoughts are interesting. They could just be like making it as what do I think about this person? Do I relate to this person? Right. And even in that like aspect, you're in some ways, you're processing it to what it means to you. So if you are on the receiving end and you are thinking, I didn't say that, then that's when I would go back to you and say, does this particularly mean what you think it means? Can it mean something else? Do you want to clarify? Is it important for you to clarify? Um, just the whole inner growth is a lot about asking yourself questions. And the quality of your questions can really impact your life, your outlook, how you energetically feel. So even though our brains may want the world to revolve around us, very natural indeed. But, if you can ask yourself, does this really apply to me? Like, why does it apply to me? Like, because there are times when people are just making statements, they're just sharing conversation, they're just not directing something at you that you may feel that it is directed at you. So, whether you are the person communicating or you are the person receiving, how communication really works is when two people are on the same page, so to speak, is when they're both like understanding the person's intention and meaning behind what they are saying. That is communication in a nutshell, in a very simple we'll just go with very simple view. That statement, I didn't say that, is a good point for you to stop, regardless if you're the person hearing it or you're the person saying it, and kind of take it back and realize that there's some type of miscommunication going in there. And if, you know, if there is that type of passive aggressive stuff going on, it's a time to take ownership in either way. If you're the person saying something passive aggressive, then say it like it is. Like if you have somebody that is saying like, oh, well, your bedroom would be a lot cleaner. This is talking to kids, right? Your bedroom would be a lot cleaner if you took out the trash every once in a while. Then an applied meaning could be made. The teenager may hear, what, you're calling me a slob? You think I'm messy? You think I'm gross? You think I'm disgusting? Like whatever. They could be making it mean whatever they make it mean. And so the parent could respond back and say, well, I didn't say that. Right. So then that's a point in time where you can say, all right, what's a different way of saying this? Like, hey, your room is cleaner with the trash taking out, right? That's all you're saying. And so when you flip it into a different way, you could just be like, hey, in my perspective, trash makes the room X, Y, and Z. It makes the room smell. It takes up more space, like whatever it is. Like, so you can start talking in a different way, but you can also address the fact of like, hey, what does this mean to you when I say this? Like, well, why do you have these feelings coming up? What is coming up for you? And so you guys can start having more direct communication and start making true connections. You know, Communication, they say that communication is the number one thing in relationships, and everybody you are dealing with, you are essentially in a relationship with, whether that is a 2-second relationship of a hi and bye to somebody, you know, whether that is your kids, whether that is your spouse, whether that's your coworker, right? Everybody you're dealing with is somebody, once you start interacting with them, you're in some type of relationship. And communication is more trickier than I think that we allow ourselves to see it as. Because as I was mentioning before, we all have our own interpretations. And language is what is helping us kind of bridge the gap between those communications. But even certain words mean something different to another person. And I'm going to give you an example. The other day in my own personal life, my teenager asked me, what is like my definition of love? And so I was like, loving this. I'm like, great conversation. Let me tell you what my definition of love is. And so, my son listened and he was like, huh, I never thought of love this way. This is how I define love. And so, even something that you would think is like universal, like what does love mean? Doesn't universally mean the same thing. So a lot of my communication with people is like stopping and saying, wait, like, what does this word mean to you? How do you define it? What does it look like to you? And when I am coaching someone, this is also what I do. Like, for instance, when I was listening to someone talk, they were asking, like, am I a doormat? Do I have doormat behavior? Okay. Well, what does being a doormat mean to you? Because maybe it means something completely different to me than it means to you. There might be some shared references between that word, But to me, like a doormat might mean like I never say no. It might mean that regardless of how I feel on the inside, I'll do whatever anybody says. Versus, to the client, a doormat may mean to them that people are going to be confrontational to them if they say no. So even though there might be commonality between these two definitions, our takes on it are completely different. How we are using our lens of eyesight, hearing, all of our senses, essentially, how we are using our senses to define that word and visualize things or feel things are going to be different. And that really impacts the communication. So once I understand what my client really means, then I can look at it differently. And the communication is more connected, and we are actually understanding what each other means. So, like in the situation with my teenager, when he understood my definition of love and I understood his definition of love, I could see why we weren't always on board with each other in past conversations. Like for instance, like if love language is gifts, or if it's words of affirmation, and then your partner isn't giving you gifts or words of affirmation, your brain is telling you, they don't love me, they're not giving me gifts, they're not giving me words of affirmation. Meanwhile, the partner is over here busting butt, like doing 20 things off of your honey to-do list, and spending all of this quality time with you. Right. So they're saying, oh, this is the way I love you. This is how I communicate. And this person over here is like, nope, not even the tiniest bit are you showing me love. Right. So understanding what words mean to each other is important. And getting that clarity is important. And you can decide how important it is to you based on how much of a relationship you want to have with that person. Like, is this person important enough to maybe change perspective of this word, or how understanding what they mean to it? Because you may not even want that person, may not even be a high enough importance in your life to need that clarity, right? So, wherever you are in your conversations and with dealing with people, I think one of the fundamental things that really changed my life was understanding that people do not think the same way as me. They do not process information the same way with me. That I logically understood. I understand that there are people that are tactile and need to touch and blah blah blah, and there are people that are slow processors. They're going to talk slower and they're going to sit back and think about things. Right? I understood and that people processed information differently, but I didn't really understand that people weren't seeing things the way that I see them, defining words the way that I would define them. Because even if you have a dictionary definition of what a word means, it's still based on your experiences, has a different knowing, because you've experienced it differently than somebody else. I once was talking with somebody, and they were very conflicted and upset because they were somebody who had served in a war. And as a yoga teacher, I worked with a lot of people who had PTSD, and I used yoga to try to help them. I was using yoga to teach them ways of processing their emotions and their past. And one person was talking to me about their frustration with people who haven't even served in the war, but maybe have been exposed to certain battles, and they didn't face the same type of devastations that this person had faced. And they were really upset that the generation today is claiming PTSD when they had no idea, what this other person had experienced. And so in their model of reality, and what they were communicating to me is that they had pre-decided that this is the standard of what qualifies for when you are allowed to have an emotional response that can be reviewed as perceived as negative, right? And so in their model of reality and what they were communicating to me is that their definition of what qualifies what you have to experience, what you have to go through means this. And then you are allowed to have PTSD, right? And so this is the way that our brain functions. Our experiences shape the way a word is applied, what it means, and thus how it is applied. And in this really, it makes communication, really more special than people realize. Because we are coming from the same world and we have the same shared words, but they mean something different. And the world is experienced different for each person. I'm not here to say right or wrong. I'm not here to call anybody out. This is just more for your understanding. And so the next time that you have a conversation and you're thinking, I didn't say that, or, you're hearing somebody else say, I didn't say that, all that really means is it's a data point. It's just data to let you know that there's a miscommunication somewhere. And how you want to react to it, and if you want to make it mean something from your past, bringing up some past memory that brings up negative emotions, that's up to you. But really, all it is a data point for you to know that miscommunication has happened, and you can decide what you want to do from there. Is it worth clarifying? Is it worth getting into your emotions and making it mean something? All right, guys, I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time, and you matter.